Morning. About 9 years ago, Lian Foundation and myself, we started this journey with SMU. I think Chen Tiong was there. We started the Lian Center for Social Innovation. And back then, bringing the social sector to what was predominantly a business-oriented university, and in fact, it first started as the center first started its beginnings in the school, the business school. Was a bit unusual, right? I think social enterprise, social entrepreneurship, those were social innovation. Those were still new ideas here in Singapore. And we're very glad because I think we did talk to quite a few universities that SMU, being the new kid on the block, said, I'll take this on, and host a center. And now, that center has grown. It's still in existence, as you all know. And we have another center, also in the complementary space, societal leadership, which tracks really the developments of this world. That social, business, government, we're all converging and all coming together, crossing boundaries. And this is an important trend, and many business schools have got social enterprise, or whatever they call it, social initiatives. It's an important trend because we are starting to grapple with very difficult issues. I don't have to tell you about any of these because they're all very clear to us that we are facing multiple social challenges that are complex, that are cross-boundary, interconnected in a highly fractured world. The fractured part is because I think we're all trying to maximize our own groups' outcomes, whereas the problem is much bigger. So you have different factions trying to do different things, pulling in different directions, whereas the problems are global, the problems are interconnected, whether it's the haze, as we know, quite clearly, terrorism and refugees, as we know, or even things like income inequality, which is a result of globalization and technological changes. And yet, as we face these social issues and social challenges, we face also the flip side, poor governance and leadership in addressing them. I've chosen Asian. I try to choose only Asian examples because we are in Asia and we want to look at Asia examples. I chose Asia examples of mismanagement and Asian examples of successes. I start with mismanagement here. Top left, Nepal, riots a couple of years ago. Top right, I work in the space of philanthropy, and this just came out, this was in April's newspaper, it's in August newspaper, 2015, Jakarta. Suharto family, they started a foundation, and the foundation was found to have taken funds and misused funds of the tune of 300 over million, and they were ordered to pay that back. It really affects the civil society and how foundations and philanthropists are viewed in Jakarta, which is a big issue. Bottom right, what this is? You must have seen this picture. China Red Cross, this Guo Mei, who was purportedly an employee of the NGO, always mentioned every time I go to China as something that shows that the charity sector is distrusted and there's lack of governance. And even on bottom left, Somali Man, many of you will know her. a little less egregious in terms of her crimes compared to those on the right side, because, I mean, she apparently made up some stories, but the work continued to be important, right? So that, controversial, even though the intentions were good, but done in the wrong way. But yet, on the flip side, I mean, we have to admit that there is good work being done. We heard from Gawat Kalinga yesterday. And I've again chosen Asian charities because sometimes we don't highlight these enough, right? Gawat Kalinga, BRAC, Cizi, these are among the biggest NGOs in the world, not just in Asia. BRAC, I think, is the largest by number of employees, more than 100,000 employees. Cizi has got 10 million members in almost 50 countries. By the way, you want to read more about this, all these three examples are in Doing Good Great, the new book by Willie Ching, which has just come out a few weeks ago. So what needs to change from my perspective? One, I go back to my leadership guru, Martin, where are you? He can tell you about this. Of course, we all know about the guy on the right, but about Dean Williams, whom I've worked with, collaborated with, professor of leadership. We need better leadership, real leadership, and it's not just a matter of getting followership because you can follow someone to the wrong place, over the cliff, which quite often happens. It's about really getting people to face real issues when sometimes they themselves are also part of the problem, and that's difficult. Because the flip side of that is that we present false solutions to people. So leadership, we need it. We need people, good people, to mobilize people to face reality, understand that, and from that move forward with solutions, with the people who are, everyone being part of that solution, and it's not easy. We need to cross boundaries because the issues that we mentioned are extremely complex, and what is left quite often are the ones that governments and the private sector cannot solve. And quite often, the social sector also struggle to solve. They cannot solve them alone. We need to cross boundaries, and it's not just about crossing to the different sector, from the business to the social sector, but it's also about getting out of your own group, because in anything that we do, there is a group that you're part of that you're trying to protect. Haze is not just a problem of plantation owners and the Indonesian government. Right? It's also consumers. Do we care about the products that we use? Do we know what is in the products? Where they come from? Where the sourcing is from? Do we care about that? If we don't care about that, then that's a huge part of the equation that is not put to play in terms of addressing the issue. Consumers have a huge role to play in this problem, in the solution. Again, I don't need to mention who these leaders are on the right as good examples of people who cross boundaries. They are your Asian Nobel Peace Prize winners in the last 20 years. I think only 2. This is a business-oriented school, so we talk about economic progress and the intersection between business and social. At the national level, economic progress and social progress. And quite often we think of these two as separate. But I see this as circular, right? Economic progress sets the conditions for you to do social programs. That's the Singapore narrative. Therefore, you must focus on economic progress. But social progress also gives you stability, a social compact. It sets the conditions for economic progress. We heard yesterday that if you lift people out of poverty, for example, they would be consumers of the future. So we should see this as a virtuous circle rather than as something that's separate and overlapping. And that's at the national level. At the corporate level, increasingly we are seeing this too. It's not just commercial value and social value as separate, and when we talk about CSR, immediately people think about corporate philanthropy. Yes, I like more corporate philanthropy, I like more corporate giving. But the mindset of that is that the two are separate. That the giving, what the corporation can give to society is after the profits, after you make the money, below the bottom line. As if the activity, the inherent activity of the company doesn't affect society. But we have to change that mindset, because everything that you do in the company can affect society. Right? So we progress in our thinking in CSR from thinking about just corporate giving, which is good, to looking through the entire value chain of activities that you do. Starting with doing no harm, your environmental footprint. How do you treat your suppliers? How do you treat your customers? Are you giving them good products that they really need? But now we are going even a step further, not just breaking down the value chain and looking at each individual activity in the value chain. We're looking at the entire business model of the company and asking ourselves, can that be done, mobilized to produce products or to produce services that actually solves a social problem? That is what some people call shared value initiative. Right? When the entire company's purpose is for a social end. In fact, shouldn't all companies' purpose be for social ends, to solve a social problem, to produce products and services that are genuinely useful rather than useless or harmful? Right? So this is where the role, the area of impact investing will come in, which people like Ern will tell you more about later. We need to grow the impact. After crossing boundaries, we need to grow the impact, because quite often success stories are not disseminated, do not go beyond the shores. And that's why we have these institutes. So I must include the Institute for Societal Leadership, but the ones that I am associated with, the Lien Center for Social Innovation, which is a few floors up, and Asia Philanthropy Circle seeks to do this. Lien Center does research and outreach and teaching and curriculum. Where's Jared? I thought I saw Jared. Now, if you want to know more, see Jared later, or go to lcsi.smu.edu.sg. You can do that now. It's okay. And you can see that there's a lot of research and advocacy, looking at unmet social needs. That we just came out with the SMU Change Lab series, looking at single parents, families with disabled members, elderly population, understanding their needs, because it's from a deep understanding that you create empathy and create ideas on how to innovate and experiment and move forward. Asia Philanthropy Circle is a platform that I just started this year, at the beginning of this year, to mobilize philanthropists to work together, coordinate, collaborate, because we see too many philanthropists working in silos, reinventing the wheel, making the same mistakes, high amount of inefficiencies, and the motivation is that if we work together and learn from one another, we will save time, save money, and grow the impact, do things that we can't do when we are working singly. I'll give you examples. But first, from Lien Foundation. And the first part of work, quite often, is diagnosing and drawing attention to the work. So Lien Foundation, as some of you might know, or not all, we are in 3 areas: education, particularly preschool education, elder care, and the environment. This is end-of-life care, which we are fairly well known for in terms of the work that we do in Singapore. Interestingly, this is an area that civil society is better able to play than government. When we entered this space, MOH came to us and said, very good, we are very glad that you're doing this and not us. Because when government does it, people talk about end-of-life care, and people would think that we want them to die faster. So to save government money, because everybody thinks that government is always out to save money, this government at least of ours. So please carry on. So I show you two pieces of work that we did, which are like bookends, because this came from our very first, I don't have a pointer. The left one came from our very, very first public campaign on end-of-life care, where we took full-page ads in Sunday Times. This was the first ad, Death, a user-friendly guide. Okay? Unusual, right, to take out a full-page ad on death in the national paper. But that was how we started the dialogue and bringing attention of people to the issue, of citizens to the issue. I mean, we have had many, many things since. The right one was not targeted at the public. I mean, the left one was. The right one was targeted at actually policymakers and the practitioners. Which is, you've heard of quality of life indices. This is quality of death index. Again, it draws attention. When you say quality of death index, people will sit up and say, oh, what is that? This is the second report, which came out last month. The first one was done in 2010, and it showed Singapore about 18 out of 40 countries. So, in the middle, not so bad, but not good. And for a government that likes to be in 1, 2, or 3 in any healthcare ranking, they didn't like it, right? So you also must understand what pushes the buttons, in Singapore ranking for not things like freedom of press, that sort of thing. I mean, that's don't work on those issues. Healthcare issues, they want to be 1, 2, 3. Health education 1, 2, 3, right? In the world. But it's also not for Singapore. It's also for other countries. I mean, that's the motivation. Allows us to benchmark using a very credible agency, the Economist Intelligence Unit. I mean, if you get an Economist Intelligence Unit, not something that people have never heard of, to do this, people will stand up. Even if the methodology is wrong, they'll still sit up and pay attention. I'm not saying the methodology is wrong. It's all right. It's never perfect. I mean, these are just snapshots, and it gives you a good flavor, but it's not the full thing, right? We did this again, 80 countries, and Singapore is improved, but it's still poor. I think it's still a long way to go. So we use this also in preschool education. We did a starting role index. After doing the quality of death, we applied the same methodology. We went back to EIU to do a ranking. This one even worse, 29 out of 45 countries, Singapore's ranking. That was before the major push. I mean, I'm not saying that this led to a major push in the government in Singapore doing a lot more. I think they were possibly already ready, but, well, at least it gave them a kick, right, to work faster. We work in the area of preschool, and that is something that you want to think about when you choose an area, because we thought that was the gap in education in Singapore. We have poured in incredible resources into universities, as you can see, beautiful universities. But we have a kind of inverted pyramid, right? The most at the university level, then JC, secondary, primary, preschool is the least resources. And we thought that's a scandal in a country that values education, because we all know how important the first years of a child's life are. So this is part of advocacy, drawing attention, showing that we are no good. We have a lot of improvements. The right one was part of drawing attention, but also mobilizing the entire fraternity. This, on the right, was a collection of all the interviews, distilled. We went to all the many childcare experts, practitioners, so academics and practitioners in Singapore, asking them what are the issues. And from all the interviews, distilling into key lessons and key recommendations for Singapore into this book. So yes, it's drawing attention to the issues distilled from experts, but it's also mobilizing the community of experts to say, let's work together. And that's what we have done with new programs. So drawing attention, mobilizing, and next step is, of course, intervening and experimenting. This is new, not open yet. I think, Tina, you know this. This is going to be open next week. What day is it? By PM. As part of Enabling Village in a week's time. Much big. It's a complex that's targeted at people with special needs. This is kindergarten. Is a collaboration between Lian Foundation and AWA. AWA is a very well-known charity in Singapore, and they started their life as a charity working on special needs and providing special education. This is an inclusive preschool, the first one in Singapore. 30% of the places are for kids with special needs. 70% other kids. Normal kids, if you like, but okay, let's not use that language. And it's a real test, because what do you think will happen when you, and that exactly happened. It's happening. The queue for the 30% of the places will be very, very long. But who's going to queue for the 70%? Which parents will want their kids to be part of the 70%? So that's part of the experiment. Okay. The other part of the experiment is to prove that it is not, apart from it not doing any harm to your kid who is normal, being with other kids with special needs, it actually improves outcomes. But what outcomes? Okay. It depends on what your objective function is, right? You know, is it just literacy and numeracy, or is it whole person? Is it empathy? Is it understanding of diversity? Working with people who are different? So this is not even open yet. We do not know how it's going to work out, but it's exciting. And we hope definitely it will work, because you can look how we're going to attract the 70% is that the program is going to be so good that if you go and visit, I've not even visited because they're still finishing it up. You say, I want my kid to be here, whether it's special needs or not. So, putting things together. So the next few examples would be putting all that together. This is a Lianic example. Lianic was started by Lian Foundation. It's our humanitarian agency doing water and sanitation projects overseas. We have done projects in Indonesia and Myanmar, but now mostly in Cambodia and China. This is Cambodia. And if you have been to Cambodia and are familiar with what happens during to the Tonle Sap River lake during the wet and dry season, you understand the issues of water. During the dry season, the lake shrinks about 5 times, or rather, it's 1/5 of the size of the lake when it's during the wet season. I visited during the dry season, okay, and the water is darker than this, definitely darker than this. It's really brown. The smell is putrid. I mean, it's unbelievable that people will even think about drinking that water, but people do. Because that is what they've been doing all their lives. Just taking, and we are going in the boat and we're saying, oh, that's a little bottom, naked bottom that's jutting out of an enclosed area. Things are going in to the water, and that's a woman washing vegetables, and it's just and another man brushing his teeth down the river. Okay, that's what happens, and that's how diarrhea and diseases get transmitted. So this is a water project. On the top left, we built a water treatment plant, which includes the filters, the activated carbon, and you can see that along the chain, as well as the UV radiation. But this is a complete system, because it's not just about the technical solution of providing a water treatment plant. What else do we need? We need hygiene education. Quite often, when and this is what we discover in water and sanitation work, people think that you build facilities, people will just use them. You build toilets, people will just use toilets. It doesn't happen. I mean, these people have been doing something in the same way for all their lives, and their parents were doing that. Why would they change? And they don't know. They don't make the link between the water that they consume and the diarrhea in their kids. They don't make the connection. So you have to partner. We have to you need the solution to be comprehensive and holistic. We need to do hygiene education, partnering the ministry, in this case, of rural development. Partnering, in fact, we engaged one of the most popular comedians to go down to make videos, and that was on national TV because, and he was teaching them, using red powder. He said, imagine that these are germs, and he drops it in, and then the powder disappears. Does it mean that the water is germ-free? Very powerful. And what's on the top right? What happens if you put in a system and 2 years or 3 years later, it's not working? It doesn't help, right? So what is sustainable? It's a social enterprise model. We train and we identify social entrepreneurs, actually entrepreneurs. We teach them entrepreneurial skills, how to run a business. And the chosen ones get to run the water facility because they have to sell the water, pay for whatever cost of maintaining it and running it, make a small margin to live on, and that will motivate him, her, to do more of that and to make sure that the market expands. So that's what we do. And the water is sold in 20-liter bottles. It's sold for 25 cents. But even then, after doing that, it's still a challenge because you have upstream or some other water enterprise selling water that looks clean, but actually they've just coagulated using alum, the impurities, filtered that, and sold it, and they're selling it to people at a cheaper price because the cost of just filtering the impurities is much cheaper, but they have not killed any bacteria in it. So actually we need regulation, you need standards and quality. But slowly, I mean, you can't solve every single problem at the same time. But again, you can see, for something that needs to work, it needs a pretty comprehensive solution and not just one piece. This is something called exercise as medicine, which is what we call it. But in NEM Foundation, we have a program called Gym Tonic. I use this because I use the right one, which is a Hong Kong example, because I haven't come across that in Singapore, to show that you can be solving the same problem, but using, on the right side, a business model, and on the left side, a philanthropy model. Okay? And to get people away from the idea that it's all about, don't get too obsessed with the tool, like social enterprise. I must start a social enterprise. Because things like social enterprises, philanthropy, business, they're all tools. what you want to be focused on is the problem you're trying to solve, right? And sometimes it's using a business model, and sometimes it's using a philanthropy model, because for different segments, you need different types of solution, different tools. So the right one is a social enterprise, but it's targeted at middle-income people, and they charge. There's no subsidies. It's a gym for seniors. Okay, you're talking about gym for seniors. I don't see that here, right? They see the market opportunity. They think that they need, seniors, and successful examples like from Japan shows that seniors prefer to be in a facility that they only see seniors, because if they see young people, they feel very self-conscious, and they feel very demotivated to go back again. Okay. The left one is a non-profit model. I mean, we believe in exercise using, in fact, we use very, very much the state-of-the-art solution, which is equipment from Finland. And these HER machines, the company is called HER. I think after I explain to you, you want to go to this gym. You have an RFID tag. You sit down, and it recognizes you. The machine recognizes you immediately. It adjusts the weight automatically to you, to a program that is tailored for you by an exercise therapist. And it will track what you have done. It will send the exercise therapist a report. You can see your progress. The exercise therapist can even increase it, and the increments are by 100 grams. You don't get this with traditional weights, right? It's 500 grams and so on. 100-gram increments, which are better for older people. And these are pneumatic machines, which means that the normal weights, you have to yank very hard, so you use a lot of force, and then the force you require is less after the initial force. But that's not good for older people, because you have joint pains and all that. It should start with pneumatic machines lighter, and then the pressure gets heavier. So we've successfully piloted this in Singapore. Very, very good results, and we're rolling it out in nursing homes, non-profit nursing homes. So in this case, in Singapore, the low income actually get state-of-the-art machines first. But I think it's a good commercial idea too. I mean, I think you can use this in a commercial setting. If any of you want to start gym for the elderly, for the middle income who can pay, talk to me, and we can maybe do this together. I'm going to go towards some of the projects that are early stage that the Asia Philanthropy Circle is doing. This one is assisted living facilities. Now, the whole idea, as I mentioned, about Asia Philanthropy Circle, is to work together to grow impact. And the identified need is that you don't really have anything on assisted living. Well, I mean, I read about this retirement village in Bukit Timah, but there's only 8 places anyway, so that's not going to make a major dent into the market in terms of need. But it wasn't really quite the model that we have in mind either for assisted living, which is in between living at home independently and a nursing home. And this is specifically for people with some healthcare needs, medical needs, and requirements in terms of help with activities of daily living. So there's some things that you can't do on your own. These are all pictures, because it doesn't exist in Singapore, of Japan. And what's interesting is that this was a Lien Foundation initiated study trip, which again, and it's not just Lien Foundation staff or board members that went. It's many of our partners in the elder care space. And we all went as equals. Everyone paid their own way to go and study the best in Japan, which is again unusual, because we try to break down the grantor-grantee relationship. I mean, we are partners. We co-create together. And at the bottom left is an assisted living facility that we are, or this whole thing is an assisted living facility that we visited. And it's really nice, because it was assisted living with a nursing home, and so if you have spouses, one spouse can live in a nursing home because he or she needs it. The other one can live in the assisted living facility, and they can have meals together on the top right, and programs together. As a result of this trip, we actually have a few of those who are part of the trip who are running charities who wanted to start assisted living facilities. But we also mobilized members of Asia Philanthropy Circle because together we also had a joint interest, and we formed a group looking at this, studying it, trying to do a proper study on the demand and supply issues, what people want and what can reasonably be supplied at what cost. We're doing this study right now. And it shows, and it's got developers on the for-profit side, and it's got non-profit providers, and it's got people who are service deliverers in specific areas, and funders. So it's a good example of how multi-sector sort of collaboration is useful and possible in an area where it seems to be a bit of a market failure. This is a project in Indonesia that we are starting on. Rusunawas are low-cost public housing, the rehousing of slum dwellers who live by the riverside. And we move into these low-income communities, which is on the top left. I visited this earlier this month. And the collaborators are foundations and nonprofits working together to deal with different aspects of what these residents need. Again, if it's one entity that is delivering it and only focusing on one area, it's not holistic, and it doesn't result in the proper community development efforts because these residents need a lot of things. So another example of working collaboratively because one cannot do alone. And so what are the learning points? I'll just summarize here and maybe take a few questions. This is all very commonsensical and simple to understand. There's no rocket science. And we are doing things. I come from a social sector perspective, which means a lot of things we're doing is from the grassroots, bottom-up approach. But it's doing these things well, right? Diagnosing, mobilizing, intervening, replicating. No rocket science here. But doing it well is not apparently so easy. So let's learn from one another. I think the conference like this really helps. What can governments do? Actually, not too much. The most they can do is to let go. The best thing they can do is let go. Who's from government here? Don't want to identify yourself. Okay, that's fine. Be equal partners, because I think quite often even government agencies think that they have all the answers. It's not just Singapore government, it's other governments as well. So I'm not just taking shots at the Singapore government. But really be equal partners and work collaboratively. And this is not easy because the power relationship is such that governments usually have a lot more power. And help build capacity this is in the non-profit, in the social sector. Because you need better leaders, you need better enabled people working on the other side, if you want to work jointly, creatively, effectively. So thank you. I think that's more than I wanted to cover.
Thank you.
But I think there's a little bit of time for...
Sure. We can open up the floor to some questions, or if you'd like to share your thoughts. Please, anyone?
Please feel free to make a comment as well. And maybe we can take one or two, take a few
we can have a conversation
at the same time.
As you stand up speaking, I would like also to stand up speaking. Thank you very much. It is very comprehensive. And I would like you to come to Myanmar to help us with your money and with your expertise.
Very, very shortly, we are starting a project in
Yeah.
Myanmar for a water
You know,
project.
as last year, I attended ASEAN regional workshop dealing with interrelated environment and livelihood together. And we spoke beautifully for 2 days. And last day, I got up and gave my comment. Oh, you tell us very beautifully. I told them, we can also read in the news, in the book. They are not, they don't like it. What is most important thing is, I try to emphasize all the time. We used to forget the people. We used to think what you can do for the people, what your expertise, and then forget it. When I was ambassador in Canberra, I read in newspaper, they trying to recruit 7 Aboriginal from the outback and put them in a hotel, shave them, can clean them, and give them the suit. And after 1 week, they vanished. They escaped back to the outback. They were quite happy there. So, all the time, we try to do what we think it is good for them. At the same time, we forget their nature, their tradition. So they were quite happy without a suit, without shower, and back to the outback, and very happy. That's the problem we are facing everywhere, everywhere. So I think whenever you do, you think about that. I try to do what you have done, like that. Water, sanitation, and after Nagis, people want to survive. The most important is food, rice. But our international NGO try to change their lettering habit. They build a lettering. They don't give. They build a lettering. They build a bathroom like that. And it collapsed after 6 or 7 months. People went to the open lettering on a stream, on a stream like that. So the most important thing is we should think about their culture. We should think what they want. When I went to Karen State on medical trip, I gathered 200 young people there and talk. You must walk like that. Please come to the Yangon and be a good leader like that. And somebody, the young fellow, got up and said, Papa, we are quite happy here. When I look at you, you look very hot. Huh? We are peaceful here. It is very awkward, you see, when we try to change that. And my daughter followed me there. And it was so beautiful, you see, the Korean state, under the insurgent. I went there. I told my daughter, oh, international NGOs, Myanmar NGOs should come here to help them. And my daughter said, Father, it is better not, they don't come here. Let them be peaceful in their own tradition. So what I emphasize is, don't forget the people. Just don't think about your techniques and theories and practice. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador. I think you make a very critical point. Quite often when we do work on the ground, we see a lot of agencies doing work for people, not even asking them what they want, not even getting them involved, let alone drive and empower them to be part of the solution. We have seen sanitation projects. You know, when I go to India, I see that Modi has got this initiative called Clean India, so they're building toilets. You know, again, not asking them what they want. After they build the toilets, do you know what some people use them for? Storerooms. Why? Because they built such beautiful toilets, it's got concrete, and it's the only concrete structure in the entire household. They say, okay, we're going to store our more valuable stuff in that, Go out to the field still. Did they really ask people what they want? They just built, right? We've seen that in water solutions as well, in everything. So what I didn't mention, the Rusunawa project in Jakarta, is that the collaboration is actually with GK, Indonesia, which is, again, a good example. I mean, we heard from Tony yesterday of a way of doing things that is successful and is starting to go overseas within Asia. But still, it's very small. But the philosophy is completely right, and that's why we work with them, not just because one of our members, APC members, is the chair of GK Indonesia. That helps. But the philosophy is that the residents themselves, and it's not a philosophy shared by other NGOs, are shareholders. They are the key stakeholders in the work. They are not recipients of aid, even no matter how needy they are. Every project that is in that community is done with the residents, and with a resident committee that is elected by the people, and decision-making is done by the residents. So and there are 2 staff who are living there from GK, really understanding, really being with the community, rather than coming in, impose your solutions. I mean, you might have read of stories of water, of wells being built. I mean, in Dean Williams' book, there was a story that he related in Madagascar. They built wells thinking that it would save the women a lot of time to go down to the river, which is what they did, for 1 hour there, collect the water, and 1 hour back. And guess what happened? After a few weeks, the wells were smashed. Why? Who did it? The woman did it. Why? Because they had disrupted a practice that had been going on for generations, which was treasured. Women going with children down to the river without men, right? Being away from the men. It was a treasured practice which they enjoyed, and which was part of the tradition. Nobody asked them what they wanted. Nobody did. That's again another example of doing things for people without any knowledge. So the point is very well taken.
I believe we have another question in the middle. Can we go to the Halogene lady first? Yes.
We'll take 2 questions, and then I think that's it, right?
So I'll continue tradition of standing. Thank you, Mr. Liam, for sharing the really good work that you have begun and are doing. My question pertains to kindergarten. So obviously you have no problem filling up the 30% of the seats. I'm curious, how are you marketing or conveying the message to the parents of the 70%? And also once it's up and running, how are you planning to kind of track the outcomes and the learning needs that come out from there to persuade further generations of parents? Thank you.
Sorry, one last question from Lee King.
Thank you very much for sharing. Okay, standing. Okay. Actually, what impacted me a lot was about the death part, because death is a subject that most of us avoid talking about. But for me, one of the most powerful experience I had was death meditation, because it transformed my relationship with my father, which was not going in a very good direction. And actually, it's a very sustainable impact in the sense that it was 6 years ago that I did this process. And up to today, it really helped. And I realized that in a very personal relationship with death or awareness of death, that we live better. So that's one thing I would like to thank you for, to create an awareness about death. Another thing is that what I observe or what I hear you're doing is actually you encompass the young and education, environment, and the old. What is your thought on actually building conscious communities whereby all these efforts are within one space? Because from how we treat this is these are special needs people. They are less privileged, and hence we are helping these communities. But like we saw what with GK, Gawa Kalinga, is that they can become model communities. That means we are supposedly not normal, we are supposedly privileged, we are the lucky ones. But yet we have so many challenges as people who live in the cities, with people who live with clean water, with electricity, with a job and all. And yet we have so much problems that is actually intangible. And sometimes in looking at these communities we help, they're flourishing, they're happy, they're harmonious. Why is there a possibility for them to become the model community that we want to follow as well? Just a question.
With the kindergarten, we want to show and tell first, right? So we haven't had many attempts, at marketing yet, because we want the facility to be up. Then we will market. So we haven't really, the reason why there's a queue for the 30% is because they come from AWA schools. I mean, they already identified, they're already their clients, if you like to use that word. So when you go to the school, after it's open next week, the village, if you go to the school, and you see the teachers, and you see the program, you see the facilities, and you interact with the professionals there, hopefully that will win, or we're confident, not hopefully, we're confident that you'll win a lot of parents over. Tracking, it's still work in progress, how we track this. So that's an experiment in itself. We will let you know, or maybe you have some ideas, you can share with us. Building communities, it's very sad that in Singapore we tend to want to hide people who don't fit in, right, in the normal community. Whether you have special needs, or you are older persons, you see all this NIMBY issues with nursing homes, the ageism that's happening, and so on. So how do you build communities that are holistic, caring, and inclusive of everybody? I mean, that is what we're trying to do with a lot of our projects. It's not easy, and you do it a piece at a time. First, we're trying to do with special needs kids, because for too long we just want them to be in special schools all by themselves, and that's our way of dealing with it. We want to do it with people with dementia, for example. So we've got some initiatives that we are hoping to start in. We're targeting a particular neighborhood to allow these people with dementia to live safely, in the neighborhood, and trying to get everyone who has got contact with these people to understand how to deal with people who have dementia, how to identify, deal with them, and help them continue to live, rather than just take them away and put them in a nursing home. These are difficult efforts, and I think we just have to do it, one experiment at a time, and hopefully with that model, we can influence the wider system, to show it's a demonstration that it can work, it's beneficial for the entire community, and let's replicate. Okay, thanks very much. I think I've
Thank you, Lawrence, for a very honest and frank sharing. We'd like to present a token of appreciation, so could I invite Martin Tan, Executive Director of ISL, to present the tokens to Mr. Lien. Thank you.
For the last panel of this summit, we've put together a panel of young men. So I'm going to ask them up on stage. There are 3 young men who don't feel very young at this point in time. In fact, they're a little sleep deprived, so they're feeling a little old. Can we get you up on stage? Mr. Eun Lai, Mr. Tong Yi, and Dr. Lim Kim Hwa. Right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Our focus for this last panel is future trends in the social space in the context of changing demographies, a more wired and interconnected and interdependent world, as well as evolving roles of governments, businesses, and civil society. Okay. Mr. Tong Yi, he is founder and director of the Thought Collective, a social enterprise in Singapore that promotes innovation in education and civic learning. The Thought Collective aims to nurture thought leaders and change makers among youth. He has spearheaded civic initiatives such as Stand Up for Singapore movement, the 2065 civic movement, and social innovation movements in Australia and London. Tommy came back home really late last night to work on his slides, so I'm not sure what time he slept. What time did you sleep? 2 a.m. Okay. Mr. Eun Lee, heads LGT Venture Philanthropy in Asia Pacific, a global impact investing company initiated by the princely family of Liechtenstein. He manages the Asian investment portfolio in Southeast Asia and China and is responsible for the advisory activities in the region, having closed several investments in education, renewable energy, and inclusive finance. Eun slept at 3 a.m. last night. Dr. Lim Kim Hwa comes to us from Penang. He is CEO and Head of Economics at Penang Institute, a public policy think tank that advises the Penang state government. Previously a portfolio manager at a Singapore hedge fund, a proprietary trader at Credit Suisse, and an assistant professor at the University of Cambridge, he will be giving us his views on future trends in the social space, role of government as regulator and balancer. You want to know what I was going to say about him, right? He was missing 3 weeks when I last emailed him, so I don't know what happened in those 3 weeks, but I was glad he turned up yesterday. Okay. Right, everybody. We're going to begin with Tong Yi because he is on the ground, being a social enterprise that he's founded. He's been on the ground, and I thought it'd be good to start with perspectives from the ground. And then we move on to Eun, who will talk to us from an investor standpoint, impact investing. What is it they're looking for? And then we end with more macro issues from a think tank, government policy standpoint. So, Tong Yi, would you mind taking the mic?
Right. It's often when we stay up at 2 a.m. to 3 a.m. preparing slides and collecting thoughts that we always wonder, I always wonder why I agreed to doing these things in the first place. So I always regret it. So, the challenge of the 15-minute format is always how do we take a lot of very, I guess, complex ideas and bring it down to a format where it actually is relevant and somehow also in coherence with all the other speakers on any one given panel. I really will be actually focusing upon the ground, and a typical style of presentation is that I tend to tell stories, right? So there'll be 3 main stories which I'll be telling today, right? But each one will actually illustrate, right? I guess important impacts or trends that are happening currently on the ground, right? And before I start this entire thing, what I'd like to do is just have a very short sharing on the idea of what we see as suffering, right? And in doing so over here, I think, right, that idea of suffering will start framing a lot of the stories that we will see, I guess, over the course of 15 minutes or so. Suffering is not necessarily pain. It is actually what most people go through when they live in the tension of what should be and what things are, right? So yesterday was the release of the PSLE results, right? And for those of you who are not from Singapore, PSLE is basically the bane of almost all parents and sometimes the 12-year-old who is going through a national exam. And in doing so over here, you can more or less guarantee that across Singapore, there will be a significant amount of suffering. The idea itself is that there are certain results that should be, but that's not the way that things are. And as long as we live in that particular tension between should be and is, we will experience suffering. So it can happen with husbands. My husband should be, but that's not what he is. grades should be, my career should be, I should be having water, but I don't have water, my husband should not be beating me, but he is, right? And in that level itself, right, I used to, in a very much early part of my career, I used to despise people who used to have experienced a huge amount of pain or suffering when it came down to their bad grades. So I was always one of those students over here who had chronically bad grades, right? And I couldn't stand the ones that would cry when they get a B. You know, it's, oh no, I don't get a... But in doing so over here, when you go much more deeper into that particular level of work, you recognize the suffering is ultimately still real, right? And as long as that tension stays between that two gaps, the suffering is there. So I'm going to begin with one particular story, and this is actually, honestly for me, the most significant event that happened for me this entire year of all the work that I did. The opportunity or privilege came when it was a student who I had taught almost in the beginning of my career. He's right now about almost 28 to 29 or so. And he had come to me sometime in the area of March, right? And the discussion itself was that he had just come back from San Francisco, and he was about to start up a new startup right there. And he wanted to consult with me whether or not he should go ahead with this particular startup, right? And essentially what it was is that it was a pornography company. Right. So he had actually gone over to the States, and in the States over here, he was developing new technologies. First, he began with virtual reality, and he realized over here the most powerful application of virtual reality was really pornography, right? Or at least that's where he perceived the market would be, right? And what happened was that when they went into the market, they realized that multiple other groups were also doing VR as far as the sex industry was concerned, or the pornography industry was concerned. And he felt that wasn't innovative. So one of the innovations that they brought in as a company, right, as a startup, was largely that, well, you will wear your 3D goggles, right, and basically you will have a live model. So unlike basically flat screens where you cannot direct, with the VR, you are able to walk around the model and basically see the model any way that you would choose to, right? But they wanted to innovate it largely by saying that, but you can also go online, right, go to Facebook and choose any of your friends. Right? And after you choose your friends, you're able, therefore, to choose your friend's face and render your friend's face onto the model, right? And they were able itself, right, in the computing power, to literally do that within a span of 2 minutes, which meant that I would go on, find my friend's profile page, make a button, click a button, wait 2 minutes, and then my face, depending on how many images you have put up, if you put up a whole range of images online, they would be able to actually more or less guess what the different expressions you would have, right? And then they would make that particular product. And he really felt at that point in time that this was one of the most innovative things, right, that would probably change the entire industry. Because he believed that no one is paying for content anymore, but people will still pay for a service, essentially, right? So when he explained to me as a business model, it's just saying that as far as pornography is concerned, it's content, right? And content is going to be free, and we can't earn from it. But a service, right, one in which you are paying a subscription to be able to fantasize about any one given person that's available on Facebook, right, is an amazing service, right? And his whole question was, should I therefore go ahead with the business? Right, so, highlight of my life, right? So this is the whole year, right? And he came over here, and we really had a pretty rigorous debate around this. When he finally went back, his decision was actually not to go ahead with the business, and he sold it, this time for $22 million, and he felt that was a very, very small payout, but he wanted out of this particular business. But this is a 28-year-old in Singapore that just got $22 million, right? Yeah, that was his share. There were a few others, right, that was involved. And it was an interesting part over there because when I really began to think about this, that if the technology was then passed on, and sooner or later I'm quite sure you'll hear about it, the ramifications, right, that technology will, I don't know, hit the world, right, will be absolutely amazing. And the whole nature of relationships and the nature of trust, I do believe will change. In doing so over here, I don't even think it's a case of this particular technology per se. But on the ground right now, we're noticing a whole range of different things, right, that are starting to impact these few main words. So let's talk about one which we are very much more familiar with. This was part of a marriage counseling session that I was doing this given week. And it was a lady, she was around 33 years old, and she had brought her 12-year-old daughter to sit in together with this particular session, right? And her whole question was whether or not, right, I should divorce my good-for-nothing husband, right, who only brings home the bacon, but doesn't do anything else, right? And he comes home, and really what he does is he watches TV, right? And she felt that she was extremely dissatisfied in the relationship because they were no longer having good conversations, right? And I said, we began to ask questions about in-laws, his own parents, right? Who he was learning role models from. And basically what she said is that, I am not my mother-in-law. My mother-in-law, right, can put up with her husband for years, right? Largely because she's not earning her income. Right? And if it basically is out, right, this particular man is now somehow taking care of her, then well, maybe she has no right to demand for anything better within this particular marriage, right? But I earn twice, right, what my husband earns. Right? My husband's not earning small amounts. I earn twice of this. I really don't need to put up, right, with this non-relationship, right? And in doing so over here, the dynamic of the relationship has changed, right? But because the relationship has changed, trust has also changed. Because trust, essentially, is our willingness to reside in common space. Trust, essentially, is our willingness to reside in common space. So, what basically this woman was saying is that I don't want to be in a common space with this particular man anymore because the nature of relationships has changed. I do see myself as more influential, more powerful than this particular man. But you'll find over here, right, that was something that was caused, right, a long time ago from things like the Industrial Revolution, right? Affluence, better education, things itself, right? There were social motivations that we more or less pushed, right? But you'll find that today, the range of social motivations that we are pushing is a whole range of them, right? Including basically alleviating multiple women out of poverty within other societies, right? We have to get it right. As we do this, there will also be social ramifications. As we solve one, it will start affecting another. And as we do this over here, the nature of suffering will also change, which means what people think should be and the way that things are will change. This is why essentially we see markets change. The kind of businesses, right, that you're going to see survive, we know this, within this given decade or so, right, it's going to profoundly change within 15 to 20 years or so. Right? Simply because social relationships, right, have also begun to change, and people's notion of suffering, right, has changed. Suffering is what essentially causes work, right? When you pay for something as a consumer, when you vote for somebody, right, when you come to a place where you make any one given choice, it really itself is informed by currently your own suffering, right? And if your suffering changes, you vote differently, you buy differently, right, you consume differently. So in doing so over here, what we're starting to see is that there's emerging trends where there are disparate narratives all over the place, right? And in doing so over here, one of the biggest challenges that we have is really where then is the new suffering, right? Where then are the new opportunities as far as markets are concerned, or even for social entrepreneurs, right? Where then are the new sufferings as far as social motivations are concerned, such that we begin to gear our work or businesses that way. So this happened, I think now is, well, this happened somewhere in October, September, I can't remember. It's a fascinating experience where I was invited by a very old friend, right, to go into one of the local international banks right here. And this was the private meeting where I was invited to go in. And in this meeting, they explained to us a HR problem, right? And they said that this was she just got this particular role, and she was more or less parachuted into this HR role. But in doing so over here, her bank, right, had actually increased the number of homosexuals that they were hiring, not deliberately, but a huge number, a group number of homosexuals were coming into the bank, right, to begin to work there. Largely because people were recommending each other and they were coming in. So 15% right, of their workforce were gay, right, 15% right there. But the board, right, of this particular bank were extremely conservative Chinese, right? And the board began to notice this. And they said over here that this is something which is not in line with actually, where this organization was initially built. Right? And what happened over here was that the board began to, or want to create a HR policy that actually began to be discriminatory in that sense. And in doing so over here, this lady from HR thought that this is a PR nightmare. Right, that if it got out, I don't know, whatever the case you're looking at social media, it will grow in a story much larger itself than itself. And she said, we need to intervene now. Right? Because if this story keeps continuing, keeps scaling, right, we won't be able to manage it within the long run. And she said, we are almost desperate because I have just come in, right? My HR team is new, and we don't have the influence to influence both groups at the same time. Right? And we need basically a skill set to come in actually and form that particular mediation. Right? But who do we look for, and how do we not make this a media fiasco? So they came in and asked, would you be willing to do this job? Right? And I said, no. I don't mind watching if you're going to do the job. And what happened was that I recommended a coaching friend itself right there had to actually come in and do this job. And she was paid 18,000 for a day. And I asked my friend, I said, you just paid 18,000, right, to do a day of training. And she says, no, we paid 18,000 right, to avoid the media fiasco. And I did, and I went in to watch this. This was a 6-hour session where we were doing this. And I have very rarely seen that level of skill that managed the narratives and emotions in that particular room, right? And we were seeing itself like this nature of work contributing more and more. As disparate narratives continue, right, new traits and skill sets will start to emerge. We're not seeing this, I mean, I used to think this was just social fear among race and religion sort of things, but it's not. It's across the board, and it is gradually being monetized, right, because it's an important need, right, for people. But the huge challenge that we have here is really, then how do we start building these platforms? And I think everybody instinctively understands that there needs to be platforms within Singapore, or within, actually most of the cities across the world, that bring in disparate groups, disparate narratives, right, and have collective, collaborative conversations. So we understand that a lot of innovation comes from actually having a diversity of people, right? But I want to imagine this in real life. How do I get a comedian, an engineer, a teacher, and a nurse, right, together in the same room? And for what particular purpose would they be there? And I'm quite sure if they do come there, right, there may be a possibility if the right mechanic or tool is brought in, that magic can be created, right? Where we understand complex problems, right, and we co-collaborate, find the common narratives, and find solutions there. Right? But talking about it on a very practical level from a social enterprise point of view, right, we don't know how to do this. A lot of our work, right, centers upon searching for common narrative among different traits, right? What kind of event could we possibly create that I would attract, right, this many different groups together, right? And we know that running topics, or running things by topic or industry just doesn't serve anymore in handling complexity. And really what we need to do is maybe move towards a more thematic, right, change in how we create things. But what are the themes, right, that everyone resonates with, right, and will find relevance to necessarily come? And we do find over here that largely it's not just the standard gaps anymore, right? If we're looking for basically, I guess, brilliant, innovative solutions, we need to be able to build complex platforms that allow everyone to interact. So this is the last closing idea. So if there is a way to maybe summarize, right, a lot of the work that we currently do in Thought Collective, it would be that, and I think it's us following that particular instinct. I do know itself right, that maybe 5 years ago, our work was weird. Right? No one really understood what the hell we were doing. Right? I still don't really understand. But in doing so over here, it is something where we are getting a lot more people coming in and saying, so what is this narrative work we should do? And what exactly are these things called platforms, right, that you're creating? And there are 3 key things that we do. We identify and nurture the commonalities with the narratives. We build the platforms for common purpose, which means we bring relevance for people to come together at the same point in time. And largely itself, right, that leads into collaboration and most meaningfully action. Right to there. Okay, so that's my beginning, and now we'll move over to Emily.
Thank you, Tong Yi. The world is complex. And
good morning, everyone. So I just want to start off in my introduction. I was labeled an impact investor. And I just want to start by a show of hands. How many of you actually knows what that means? Okay, a sprinkling of hands. I went to a conference once when I asked the same question, and these three people at the back put up their hand very quickly, and I said, so the people up there, what does the impact investor do? They got very excited. They said, you guys invest in dynamite companies. So just to clarify, no, I don't invest in dynamite companies, and I'll spend a few minutes telling you a little bit about impact investing and what I do. But I really wanted to sort of bridge to what Tommy has done and sort of frame the kind of at least giving you some really thought-provoking ideas about trends that exist in the social space in relation to issues like suffering, in relation to divergence, and so forth. I really wanted to sort of logically connect the next one to say that I'm going to try to present some solutions together working with you. And it's not a very easy thing to do in 15 minutes, but I want to start with the analogy of the car. Now, assuming that all of us are in this room because we are societal leaders. So that ultimately wants to bring us in a common destination of sorts. And just say, for example, that that's the car. So some people choose to run the car like a social enterprise, like Tongi. Some of you here choose to run that car as a charity. Some others choose to do it as a corporate maybe, right? So that's the vehicle of delivery. That's the vehicle of delivery of social change. And in the car, there are many stakeholders, right? For some people, they're universities. And what do the universities do? They provide research. You've heard from Lawrence this morning that Lien Center provides a lot of research for social problems. That's kind of like the roadmap or the GPS. That kind of gives you and helps refine what direction you go. At the same time, all of you, in fact, I'm sure all of you here, you guys are the drivers. You guys are the societal leaders. You guys are the people driving a car. Now, and governments and policy, which Kim-Hwa will talk about later, also has a large influence because that's the infrastructure, the roads, the policies that help shape where the car can go. But one crucial piece that people often forget is who is putting fuel in the car. And that's the purpose of my sort of 15 minutes, to talk about investment, because investors are the ones that fuel that change. So I agree with Tongi in the sense that it's multi-stakeholder, but we need all these parts to work. Now, the first trend I'd like to allude you to is investment. And the first trend is, you know, the world is really very bifurcated. Traditionally, we always see the world as philanthropy or investment. Now, look over to your right, that small little bubble there, which is on average in the US is about 310 billion, which seems like a large amount of money. But think about it, it's a drop in the ocean compared to the kind of social problems that we're trying to fix today. Now, can anyone guess how much it is estimated to fix, say, climate change? Anyone? Well, the recent study suggests somewhere around the range of $10 to $17 trillion just to fix one problem. We haven't even talked about poverty, healthcare, sanitation, so forth, right? So unfortunately, the first thing that you should understand about the world today is that it's very bifurcated. Most people think that that small little drop in the ocean on the right is going to fix all of society's problems. Now, I like to respectfully disagree. And we are part of the part of the universe that comes on the other side, which is the larger pool of capital. And you can see over the last few decades what has really happened. This emergence of what is broadly known as value investing or social responsible investing, right? And these two sort of segments that you see, ESG. Now, the first one, Lawrence touched on this a little bit in the morning. Now, ESG, imagine if all of us are investors today. ESG means that while we're making investment decisions and deploying capital, right, putting fuel in the car, we think also about environmental, social, and governance factors. Now, an evolution of that is SRI, which is known as social responsible investing. And that's kind of slightly different in the sense that on top of looking at ESG factors, they also put in certain positive and negative screens. So, for example, they might not say, I will invest in sin industries like pornography, ammunition, and so forth, but they might also put in other screens like no child labor. Okay? Now, the thing to understand here is these two categories, although it's a step in the right direction, it's driven in a way by a value, right? But none of these investors can tell you that they've created good. They can only put their hand on heart and say, we've done no harm. Okay? And that's very important to understand. So you haven't added to the social problem, but neither have you fixed it. Now, that's where impact investing comes in. Now, impact investing is slightly different in the sense that it's simply defined as investments intended to create positive social and environmental outcome in addition to financial return. Now, if you break that down, there's really 4 components, right? And you can quite simply that we are talking about investments but they're investments with the intentionality to create positive good. So unlike a no-harm strategy, it actually holds itself accountable to create that good. Okay, and that's a very, very important distinction. Now, just to clarify these terminology, because I know for many of you here, it's the first time that you're listening to this. So I want to bring in another concept briefly, which is a very close cousin of impact investing, which is actually our name, venture philanthropy. We coined it probably around 8 years ago. And it's a hybrid word that brings in the concept of venture capital, that's where venture comes from, applied to philanthropic outcomes. And the kind of principles that we bring in is the same as what venture capitalists do in Silicon Valley. We invest in and focus on few young, rapidly growing organizations. We do intensive due diligence. We look at the business model and say, what's the right kind of fuel, right? Because if you give the wrong kind of fuel to the wrong kind of car, if you put a petrol in an electric car, it would not run, okay? And we give what we consider the 3 forms of capital, which is not only financial capital, but social and it's intellectual capital. It's your networks and what's in your head, your expertise. And then we have a very long-term view, and we ultimately try to optimize what we call triple bottom line return, which is essentially in people, planet, and profit. Okay? Now, because we're in SMU, I feel obliged to at least have a quiz at this point in time to prove that you've been listening to me. So let's have a look at this. Now, if we draw a short line against social return versus financial return, and I asked all of you to sort of help me mark where traditional philanthropy is, when we write a check and you give it away, where venture philanthropy is what I just described, and impact investing. Now, let's start with traditional grant giving. So if all of us, for a moment, wrote a $100 check and we gave it away today, say to SMU, if we had to place that, let's assume all of it gives high social return. Now, where would that sit? Would that sit left, middle, or right? Okay, who says left? Who says middle? Okay, so you guys are very educated because that is absolutely the correct answer. But quite often people get it wrong. They always say, oh, it's minus return because we don't get any return, or it's 0 return. Actually, the number is minus 100% return. Because from a financial viewpoint, if I give away the $100 check and in a year from now I pick up the $100 check and I don't get any interest or return, that's 0. But from day one, the moment I give it out, it's lost already. And that's okay. I'm not saying it's bad. For some things like disaster relief, you know, charitable grants are the most powerful form of capital, and that's okay. And where is venture philanthropy then? Middle or right? Some say right. Anyone say middle? Okay. Obviously, you guys weren't listening. I'm joking. It actually sits in the middle, okay? And the reason why it sits in the middle is because it's a very flexible form of capital that can come with grants as well. It can go from donations all the way to investment. And the moment that you pair, for example, we all know at donations is minus 100%. If I pair donation with investment capital, it's minus. And eventually, if it's all investment capital, it's positive. And the last one is impact investing, which, as you know, it's all about, you know, it's in the positive terrain. They're looking for a positive return, whatever that may be. Okay, now 2 points I have to make before I move on, and all of you, to understand, these 2 points that you should remember. But number one is that these are not distinct pools of capital. Okay, they're not separate. They can be used together and they can be complementary. And sometimes it's an evolution. Sometimes when a company is small, like a small social enterprise startup, they need to rely on grants. And as they grow, as they become financially sustainable, we can migrate to investment capital. Okay, so that's really trend one. Now I want to move on and talk about trend two. Trend two is that, you know, as some of our speakers yesterday and today had mentioned, there's a blurring of lines between the not-for-profit model and the for-profit model. And as Lawrence mentioned this morning, we care less about your structure, but more on your output and your outcome. In my sort of 7 years of doing this, I've met many companies that describe themselves as cooperative, not-for-profit, but when I look at the model, they're actually very financially sustainable. In the same way, I've seen many companies describe themselves as for-profit, but when I look at the financial statements, they should have been set up as a charity. Okay? So I care less about this, but I want you guys to understand that the second trend is that there's a wide spectrum of organizations, starting obviously from businesses which are purely for-profit all the way to charitable models. But what's really interesting about this space, and where I feel that there's some very powerful solutions, are the entities that sit in the middle, because they're hybrid entities. We've all heard about how powerful social enterprise can be, but on the other side of it, it's very powerful. You've got companies like Unilever or Danone that have such a strong CSR component. Now the CSR component is integrated with their core business. Now what is that? And then you've got some organizations, like I was just in Hong Kong 2 weeks ago, where I went to see the YMCA, a very, very long-established Christian charity, but they've set up 2 hotels, and some of you may have stayed in Hong Kong. Now the 2 hotel accounts for 63% of their internal income. That's really powerful. There's nothing stopping YMCA from having more hotels and spinning out to standalone social enterprise model, which is driven by Christian values, right? So the world is not black and white anymore. And in the same way, these organizations can attract a blend of capital. So as you're thinking about effective solutions for society going forward, think about using different models, okay? Now I'd like to move on to the third trend, which is really about disruptive innovation. I know that you've heard a lot of this, but it's something that's very powerful in finding a solution. Ultimately, what is a disruptive innovation, right? Why do we live in a world where the world's biggest retailer, Alibaba, has no inventory? Okay? Why do we live in a world that the world's biggest allocator of hotels has no hotels, Airbnb, right? And the list can go on. So these are forms of disruptive innovations. But what are disruptive innovations in the social space? And I wanted to show you and talk about one of our portfolio companies called Mkopa, which is in Africa, in sub-Saharan Africa, which essentially what I think provides a disruptive solution. Now what that solution is essentially many people in sub-Saharan Africa have no access to electricity, affordable electricity, okay? Now what Mkopa did sort of 5 years ago when we invested in them is they made a low-cost solar home system. Now imagine sort of a solar panel which you see in the video, they put in your sort of shack of your roof, and it's got 3 cables. You can use it for light, you can use it for charging. Now a couple of things that some of you may not know. Well, most of these people, our beneficiaries there, are living below the poverty line, less than $2 a day. They have access to mobile phones. That's their only source of connecting with the market. There's actually a 63% penetration of mobile phones in sub-Saharan Africa. So that's one fact. The other fact is they have plenty of light, which can be converted through solar energy. But the issue is that they can't afford the money to buy that system. So how do we make it affordable? Now, Mkopa, you'll see in a second, combines a pay-as-you-go technology with the solar home system. So they pay a very small deposit, they take the solar home system home, and they pay with mobile credits, a little bit like a pay-as-you-go package. They pay roughly about 50 cents per day, which is actually cheaper than what they're currently paying for kerosene. And after 12 months, they own the solar home system. Okay? So I'm going to show you a short video first, and let's talk through it after. Can I have the video, please?
You can see we've got 3 lights. Got 1, 2, 3. It's very bright. My name's Joseph Loisa Biwata, and this is my shop. Many people cannot afford electricity. So with Mkopa Solar, the customer will get delighted to have paid that initial deposit, and then affording 40 shillings a day is not a problem. You may be paying bits by bits. You own it immediately after paying the last deposit in just 1 year. Actually changed the lives of people.
Yeah, these are now my cows. My name is Alex Keitan. I work in Kapanet town, just as a farmer. The solar panel, I've just put it on the roof. And the wire, then it connects to the control, then to the control box, which is inside the house. So now, when you want to check the credit, just press it here. Then it shows me this 08 days to credit. I opted for installment 40 shillings every day, because when I get some small amount, I can deposit 100 shillings, 200, 300, depending on what I get over the week or even the month. I can even pay 1,000. Yeah, so I find it easy. Then the kitchen, the light is here. It has actually changed my life, because since I bought it, I started using it to light the 3 rooms and even charging. Yeah, and even my neighbors benefit for charging their phones. And then the balance is here. Mkopa has received your payment. Kenya shillings, 150, paid to account. my account now. I find it very easy because wherever I am, not only in town, but wherever I am, I can deposit some amount to M-Pesa and then transfer it to M-Kopa.
Kwa majina naitwa John Cherutis. Mimi ni fundi. Kama baba, mimi naona hiyo sola ni mzuri kwa kusomea. Unajua kuna watoto wenye wako shule. Sasa wakiwa na homework, sola ni rahisi. Sio kama mafuta. Na haina moshi sasa na ni bright. Sola ni bright. Sikuwa nafikiria. Ndio nilipoona ama kuambiwa na Joseph ndio nikafurahia sana.
Okay, let's say that you don't have electricity. M-Kopa will help in that the customers, they will have saved a lot compared to they'll be buying this kerosene. It's going to be wonderful for them.
So you can kind of see where the technology is used, and this really brings me to the fourth trend, which is that no matter whether you come from it from a philanthropic perspective or investment perspective or you're a social entrepreneur, the overall trend is that people are driving more accountability and transparency in producing those outcomes. Okay? So I just want to show you a little bit here about how we look at M-Kopa. So we've invested in M-Kopa for 4 years now. And I'm very proud to say that we've just raised the recent round, which was over 20 million of debt financing. And that will power over 1 million homes in Nairobi, Kenya, and Uganda by 2018. If you look on the right, you will see that we measure this impact. We look across 2 dimensions, both on the reach of impact, so the number of beneficiaries or households, the number of clients that are actually living below the poverty line, and at the same time, that countries that we're expanding to, we're currently trying to bring them to Asia as well, which has the same sort of problems as Africa. And then more importantly, we also look at the depth of impact. Now, what's the material and social change on their lifestyle? The increased incomes, the ownership of assets, increased safety because they have electricity now, and at the same time, obviously, reducing environmental pollution. So this is something that I think is a very, very important trend. And I think, Lawrence alluded to this morning. In the traditional charity model, while charity organizations, many of them are fantastic, but many of them are very opaque as well. So you don't actually know where your money goes, how it's spent, and the kind of outcomes that they're delivering. Now, quite often people ask me, as an impact investor, why is it that we have a profit motive? Well, I can only speak about ourselves and generally, but the profit motives, if you know that you give money to a company that produces profit, you know one thing, they've got transparency. They can tell you exactly how they're using their finances. And more importantly, if they do have a profit, it means that they have the ability to scale. And that's a real reason why we choose to go through an impact investment model. Because if we seeded this 4 years ago as a charity doing exactly the same thing, I don't think they can get to 500,000 homes today. Okay, it's to drive scale and effectiveness of solution. And then the last slide that I want to have is just to tell you a little bit of how that's contextualized for Asia. And some of the other speakers have also mentioned, Asia is at a unique intersection between the greatest wealth and the greatest need in the same place. And that's very, very rare, okay? So with wealth comes responsibility. And one of the things I want to talk about is that we are new to wealth, right? We're new to wealth in the sense that Singapore is really in the 2nd or 3rd generation. So like for me, I'm 3rd generation, but my grandfather would never have thought about philanthropy because he had to put food on the table. And same with my parents. But for many of you here, we're privileged enough to start thinking about certain core issues, as in, what is my identity? What is my value system, right? What is my legacy? And this is why I wanted to share this slide, because I work for an impact investor that's ultimately seeded by a family. It's actually the princely family religious line. So Prince Max on the left is actually my boss. And it's very interesting because the family is 25 generations and 900 years old. So when you talk about things like this, and you talk about what is the legacy and what is a sustainable solution, you have a very, very different lens. And I'd like to plant the thought in each of you, because I look around and many of you are very young leaders, is to start really thinking about what is my value system, what is my identity, and what do I want my legacy to be. And I will just sort of end by telling you one story, and maybe I'll just do it in the form of a question. How many people here have heard of the company Standard Oil? Anyone? Okay, I see 2 ladies, maybe 3 of you. Now, I asked the same similar question. How many of you have heard of the Rockefeller family or foundation? Almost 3/4 of you. So when we're talking about sustainable legacy, I like to say that Standard Oil is the company that John D. Rockefeller started. It is the source of wealth to why Rockefeller Foundation in its 5th generation exists today. But it's surprising in a few generations how many of you have never heard of Standard Oil. But it was really the source of wealth for the Rockefeller Foundation. It is the fuel that allows them to drive the car to where they are today. And it's the name and the legacy that you will probably remember for years going forward. And it's really great because I'm great friends with Justin Rockefeller's 5th generation. And just, a couple of months ago, while the family made money in oil, it's fantastic that 5 generations later, this generation has just made a pact called Divest Invest to divest all of the oil assets from their portfolio. So I'm just trying to say that as you guys are thinking about social value, as you guys are thinking as your role as societal leaders, think about legacy. Because whatever you do in this lifetime is only as good as the fact that you can make it sustain for future generations. And with that, I'd like to thank you.
Well done, Anne. That was a great lecture. I'm sure our business school will want to hire you anytime. And now, Kim Hwa, please.
Thank you, Lai Ching. So it's a difficult act to be doing the last speaker in the last session. And of course, that's probably because I didn't reply to emails. Okay, so Penang Institute is the public policy think tank for the state government. We are funded by the state government, and the Chief Minister is the chairman of our board. So we work very closely with the state government in terms of executing the policies as well as giving them ideas. So previously, we talked about the car and the fuel that goes into the car. What do we see in the future trends from the government perspective in terms of what we think we should be doing in facilitating the car to drive? What we have seen, it seems to be, let's think about it in 2 spaces, in the physical space as well as the social space. And social space, by that I mean the online media. Given that it's a young crowd, I think I'll spend more time on the online space rather than the physical space. But because we live in a globalized world, what seems to be happening is there are lots of ideas. You can have a certain idea, I can have a certain idea, and in theory, we should be respecting each other's views. And as a result of that, from the government's perspective, if I want to facilitate your idea, his idea, my idea, and we want to build a road, you end up being a spaghetti. So you have all these things coming around everywhere, and there's no coherence. And that leads to the first point that I want to touch upon, which is in terms of the challenges that we have to, from a government's perspective, you have to think about it. It's a balancing act, because what type of government or what type of policy should there be in place? Is it it's a balancing act? Do you want to respect the views of the individual, a libertarian type of approach, whereby there's a lot of respect for individualism, your views, your ideas, compared to an interventionist type of approach, that there are certain ideas and thoughts that through government policies it should be propagated. Whether you call it as propaganda or not, it's certain principles that the government rightly or wrongly believes is the right way for the society, and this is how we want the society to develop. And this, to some extent, is very related to Asia, because people think about the Asian values. So should there be a strand principle that the government should intervene in protecting the Asian values and against the quote-unquote Western non-Asian values? Or is there a right for the government to intervene that way? So then it leads to the idea of what's the respect of private information, the Data Protection Act. So lots of information we voluntarily disclose, either through your Facebook, your Twitter, etc., all these. And what can the government do or not do in that sense? Can the government and can the policymaker use this space, this information that people voluntarily disclose online, as a way of devising, changing the policies, tweaking the policies, as well as to get a feedback of whether you like it you like how things are going or not going. And you can see it in Singapore very clearly. People voice lots of opinion about certain policies in Singapore, and then you can see the government changing on that ground. And you can also see it not happening in certain countries. People resent certain governments, and then it comes to a certain level, and then things start to explode, and then we have the Arab Spring. So then it comes to in terms of policy making, how do you actually balance all these? We know that a lot of information is up online, the big data, and a lot of all these are going to be more interconnected in the future through Internet of Things. Your life, your car, driverless car, where you go and where you eat, where you work, all these are all interconnected. When we move on into this space, what is the role of the government or policymaker in terms of, in some sense, safeguarding oneself, protecting the society's value, or protecting the certain religion respects, or safeguarding the society against extreme ideas? Should it be, in some sense, should it be contained in the first place, or is that a healthy development in the society? How should a government balance that? So that's, in some sense, the second problem, the second challenge. And in all these, an opportunity is, of course, a challenge, and the challenge is, of course, an opportunity. It depends on how you approach the respective idea. And of course, then it comes to the disruptive technologies. And it's changing the way business models and our life. The old social contract of lifetime employment seems to be over. And in, I think, Generation Y, the average time that an individual spends with an employer is about 2 years, 3 years, and it seems to be shrinking down as we go into X, Y, etc. So Airbnb changes your relationship with your asset, with yourself. You have a home, but now you have decided to sublet it out. And it then changes the way you interact with your family and the society that then and beyond. Likewise, Uber changes the whole concept of employee-employer. Are these contractors? Are these employees? If they are employees, should they be given certain rights? And these are issues that the government and perhaps the courts will have to intervene and decide. But it is not so clear. The courts decide might be in a certain direction, but is that what is acceptable to the society as well as being acceptable to the vested interest? Uber is definitely the one getting most headline on this issue of vested interest. The local taxis operators definitely resent Uber because it takes away a certain part of their business. So should the government step in and accept it or reject it? And on what policy basis should that be? All these are very new, and it is difficult to, from a policy-making perspective, to extrapolate the future growth. Uber and Airbnb didn't really exist, say, 5 years ago, or not in this level of popularity. So how would the government respond to it? Because the way the government responds to it would then dictate your relationship of the individual with the society, and then it will affect, ultimately, your work-life balance. How much time do you spend with your family? If you're an employee in a taxi company, you're probably committed to work certain hours. But if you're a contractor with Uber, you have a lot more flexibility in managing your time, spending more time with your family versus working, and all these changes. So these are the three opportunities or challenges I can think of from a policy-making perspective. But likewise, in terms of social space in the future, from a government perspective, you have to manage different types of external factors. The first one, ASEAN Economic Community, comes in end of this year, in a few weeks' time. In theory, it is freedom of movement. One aspect of it is freedom of movement of skilled labor. So in that sense, when people can move around, does that then change the values from one country to another country? And ASEAN itself is a very diverse society, whether it's in religion, whether it's in income, whether it's in beliefs. So how does that then cause your interaction between the society, your work, as well as yourself? And recently, the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement was released. Out of that is, of course, the society's impact, which is people would generally think about this agreement as being purely business, investment, government procurement, all these things. But of course, beyond all this, the effect would definitely filter down to the society level and your interaction with your society. For example, what's the respect of workers' rights? Do workers have a collective bargaining power? How about child labor? How about discrimination? So in this agreement, all these are set in the sense that the signatories to this agreement would have to uphold these specific items in terms of collective bargaining, respect of individual rights, as well as no slavery, no discrimination type. But of course, beyond this, then there is definitely in Malaysia, the very controversial issue of price of medicine. And how right or not right is it for governments to be, for patent holders, for companies to be having exclusive rights to manufacture or to sell the medicine for the society? And it then changes your dynamics that you have, your interaction with the society. You might have the need for that medicine, but if your means of getting it is not there because the prices are too high, is there a space for the government to step in terms of policy making? If the government wants to step in, does it have the right to step in? If you are signatory to this agreement, for certain countries, you have to then have the respect of the patent holders' rights. So is that fair? Is that not fair? It's something that is not clear. It's clear in the agreement, but it's not clear in terms of the society tolerance and respects for that. So it is still something very new, and I guess as the Asian society and the society in this part of the world ages, it would be something that will increasingly affect all of us. So that's the first sort of impact in the future that's going to start affecting us, but it's coming from the outside world. The second is, has been here for a long time, corporate social responsibility. What I want to raise is it lip service? Sometimes people have got to the certain companies have got to the stage whereby they just treat it as lip service. People expect me to be doing that. I just assign a certain number of days of my employees, go and clean up some park, clean up some rivers, and that's it, and put some nice photos, and then put on the newspaper, put in my annual report, and write something about it, and done. Is that what it should be, or is that ways of improving such things? If there is such a need for companies to be doing corporate social responsibility, should we tap on the energy? Should we tap on the resources from there? Professor Arnold de Meyer yesterday mentioned about BP and Beyond Petroleum. I thought about this as well, probably because it was fairly big at that time in the UK. So it is shocking, say for example, to hear that the Rockefeller Foundation is divesting the oil and gas portfolio, and for an oil and gas company, BP, to be embracing a world beyond petroleum. Is it something of a good ploy from a strategic perspective to be doing that to quiet your critics, or is it a good strategy in terms of changing of your business model? That is something that we leave it to the corporate to be deciding. But what we should note of is that there's energy coming out from all these in terms of the society's expectations of what corporate should do and how we should tap on it. And I want to draw an example in Penang, which is that B. Braun is a medical device company from Germany, and the government, the state government, has tapped on B. Braun to be doing kidney dialysis centers. And it is good PR for a company, increases your presence, increases your branding, gets you more in touch with the local community and helps you, well, do good in that sense. And how this can then be extended to a private-public partnership. Of course, from there, public-private, and then how society can come into that. So how do we actually get this going without losing sight of what the corporate should be doing in terms of delivering shareholders' return to the shareholders, doing good for the society, taking care of the local employees, their local workers, so that they can have a good work-life balance, etc., with their family. And how can a government be a facilitator in this? I used another example called Penang Science Fair. There's a big manufacturing cluster in Penang, and these companies, multinational companies, will have certain corporate social responsibilities. And how do we actually tap on this need to be increasing the society's interest in this field of sciences? And the government facilitates by bringing all these companies together and try to have a fair, let these companies showcase their technology kits, and let the local community participate in it. It is good in the sense of, from different perspective, from the society perspective, from companies, from employees' perspective. It gives them great pride to be showcasing their own products. So this, I think, in some sense, is what a government should think about in terms of framing of a policy. How do you actually tap on all these energies that is going way beyond the disruptive technologies, the society perspective, as well as the corporate perspective? The next thing that I want to sort of jump over is that to ensure that I can actually still come back to Singapore, I need to do a bit of PR for my own country, my own state. This is the physical space that we are talking about. How Penang can be using the physical environment to be reinvigorating and getting the society more excited about certain aspects. Lonely Planet recently rated Georgetown, which is the older part of Penang, fourth in the world. And what I want to highlight, and is under the red line, is that it has become one of Asia's most inventive and diverse arts communities. And it is using the physical space, social space, to be driving a certain policy of a government, to reinvigorate the city, to give it a new phase of life, to give the society who has certain talents to be able to embrace as well as develop in their specific niche. So how do you actually get this? What we realize is that a lot of the properties in Georgetown is actually privately owned. So how do you actually get the local property owners to be equally excited about a project that you want to do? And of course, it is not easy, especially in the Asian culture of arts. Is probably not something that you want to do first thing you encourage your child, your kid to be doing. But it is important in terms of developing a different side of an individual. An innovative individual has to be by default not purely a mainstream person. Taking his example of his friend coming to him, it is not something that we always have to think about it immediately. So physical space, social space, and the problem and the issues that government face in this is getting more and more difficult. The ideas are more diverse. And thank you for...
Thank you, Professor. Right, everybody, I'm going to pass this time to you because I need you to keep these guys on their toes so they don't fall asleep. Can you give them very difficult questions, please? Who would like to start? Yes. So realize that governments can also be societal leaders, you know, just as the Chief Minister is trying to do in Penang to create some social impact. Yes.
Hi, thank you so much for your insights. My name is Prashanti and I'm from the SMU staff. My question is for Mr. Enli. You spoke about venture philanthropy. It's a relatively new concept. In Asia, we have a lot of people in the last decade there's a new surge in wealth, personal wealth. So I was wondering, do you see the ecosystem around this venture philanthropy growing in this part of the world? And how do we ensure with many family-owned enterprises that this legacy goes on? And for many people, it is the first generation that is experiencing this sort of a wealth. So they're relatively new to this. How do we help set up an ecosystem where there is transparency, there is participation from families? And secondly, do you see any entry barriers for, say, common people? You work with a royal family, but you know, somewhat medium to sort of newly wealthy, minted people somewhat, to participate in this space to create an impact.
She wants you to manage her fortune.
I don't have one, not just yet at least.
So thank you for your question.
You.
I agree that not most of us are not fortunate enough to be princes or princesses. So it's a great question. So I'll break it down. So venture philanthropy and impact investing is very, very new concepts. As an industry, it's only been around for about 1.5 decades. And in Asia, literally for the last maybe 4 or 5 years. There's some pretty progressive developments in Singapore and the region, if you want to get to know. Some of the ones, I don't know whether anyone from AVPN is here. Kevin, I don't see Kevin here, but AVPN, Asian Venture Network, if you Google them, my battery has run out of mic, okay, there we go, hi. AVPN is a very good source of learning. They started literally about 3 years ago with a handful of members, and I think now they have probably over 200 members, so people like yourselves, includes individuals, includes corporates, includes foundations, really geared towards learning. So that's really the first place. You have to learn first, because before you learn, you can't do, right? So that's the first thing. The second question is, how does one begin to get involved in the space? And there's several ways. So in the ecosystem, there are also several advisors. You're starting to see lots of corporates as well as banks have kind of philanthropic advisory that touches on impact investing, venture philanthropy. So there's one way. It's good to know that most university courses have an element of that as well. So that's another way. But it's just like philanthropy, right? No one can train you to be a philanthropist. The best way to, in my personal view, is to support, firstly start with a very personal question, which is, you know, what country and sector do you want to help? Okay? And then get a little bit of learning. I think in Asia, a lot of people love education. But you know, even education, there's everything that goes from early childhood, primary, secondary, tertiary, vocational, adult. And then try to find out what sector problem you want to fix. Is it access to education? Is it retention? Is it learning outcomes, right? They're different. So do a very personal search first, and then try to get some learning from there. And from that learning, you can find other people that are aligned with you and sort of share ideas. And the second way is obviously to jump in. And the best way to jump in is to go along with a person that's really been doing it for a while. Okay? And quite often, even though we essentially take our fundings from the princely family, we actually co-invest with other families because they want to leverage on our expertise and we want to leverage on theirs. And that's the best way to do it.
Great, thank you, Anne. Questions? Go ahead. We've got one there and we'll take both. But why don't we take 3 questions and then you have a choice in terms of which you'd like to take.
Hi, good morning. Thank you for the talk. We know that the way forward is actually to work in collaboration, and I think a lot of organizations are doing it, less so on the NGO levels, but I think for the NGOs the way forward is definitely collaborations, working towards one common goal, and I don't think many NGOs have done that yet. Tongyi, you know, in your experience, how do we create that common platform? How do we get together to lobby for change and seek funding?
And Dr. Lim, what is the role of the government in helping us achieve that goal, in helping us form collaborations towards a common goal in achieving social change for the country? Thank you.
We'll let them think for a while. Let's have your question here.
Hi, I'm Jared from the Center for Social Innovation. I have a tough question. The question is about empathy. Right? How do you scale empathy? Tongyi is doing it student by student, you're doing it philanthropist by philanthropist. But how do you get scale on such an idea which is very person to person?
We have one more question there, so take a little time to think about it. Yes.
Hi, I have a question about the role of business. So going back to your example about the car, how do you get businesses to think about these sort of social issues from the perspective of where does the oil come from in the first place, the fuel that you're actually putting in the car? How do you get them to think about and talk about how do they make their money in a way that is, socially responsible, environmentally responsible, beyond just then taking that other car,
and doing that, because where the oil comes from is the fuel that you're actually putting into this financial venture. Capitalism that we're talking about, that's
quite important as well in terms of extracting that fuel. So I just want to hear your thoughts on that.
Okay, so collaboration, empathy, and then something about being socially responsible in terms of where the funding sits. Who would like to start? Tongyi.
With regards to IT collaboration, I think one of the things that struck me most in terms of the own experiences, and this is an incident that happened about two years ago, right? Thought Collective had grown to a level where we really felt that we wanted to collaborate a lot more, and we realized that whatever that we were doing as far as impact was concerned was really a drop in the ocean, and that if we didn't actually somehow link with other organizations or even government, right, at that point in time, it really would have been futile. So the prejudice at that point in time was actually, as a social enterprise, we had an internal narrative in the organization. Don't touch the smelly corporates because they're going to pollute us, right, with their evil money-making schemes. And don't touch government because they're going to control the shit out of us, right? With whatever funding they're going to operate into that. And those particular levels of prejudice, I honestly think didn't allow us to collaborate because we wouldn't get past. And it was something where we had an internal conversation first, where we started to work through, okay, so where are these prejudices coming from, right? And the more that we went out and we began to actually connect, the more we realized actually the beliefs were half nonsense anyway. That was the first. The second thing that really began to happen was after we got rid of that particular internal narrative, right, of who to begin to work with, we then began to engage with government. And it was fascinating because there was all this like cloaked conversations so that there was this one thing that we wanted to do. We wanted to start this new thing called a repeat student scholarship, right? And the idea itself was that we gave scholarships basically to the top students in Singapore. We never gave scholarships to students who were truly struggling, right? And we wanted to run that particular scholarship, and we felt that actually government could be the possible way to start to fund that particular scholarship right there. So we went to actually go and speak, and everyone said that was an amazing idea. We would love to work together with you, right? And that's it. So what happens is they all said it's an amazing idea, and it never really moved. I never understood why. So for years we waited, right? Trying to work this through, right? And just thinking, well, maybe it's just not the right time. Then we saw another organization take on this idea, and the government was working together with them, right? And we go, Tamada. It's like, weren't we the ones that seeded this idea? How come it ended up with this particular group, right? And at that point in time, it was fine because the work was being done. But the question was asking, why did this group move so quickly and we moved like snail pace? And I know this seems obvious in retrospect. It didn't hit us at that point in time because the other group was a charity, and the government could work with the charity seamlessly, but can't work with a social enterprise because ultimately, are you an enterprise or not, right? And I really took the point as to what Lawrence was raising and what Ania's raising. Social enterprise in itself is a tool, right? And we became so much of an advocate of social enterprise that we forgot that actually that's just one part of the tool set, right, that we really had. And we really wanted to find a diverse way by which to collaborate. We actually have to open up a far more wide range of tool sets, including the setting up our own charities, the setting up itself of full-fledged companies, right, there. And yeah, social enterprises are one Trojan horse, but they're not the only Trojan horse that we can have. Yeah, so, and that range was really very important.
Go ahead. Whichever question.
Happy to attempt to tackle the empathy question, and I'm happy to try to tackle the business question very briefly. So on empathy, it's interesting. A couple of years ago, when I first started in the space, I was looking at investing in a social enterprise that's called the School of Empathy. And they're essentially set up by sociologists and childcare experts. And their premise was really that empathy is formed from the age 0 to 7. Okay? That's their theory. And they have a lot of science behind it. And I remember watching this video where they put these kids together, and there's always these two perpetual bullies. I mean, these were like 5-year-old kids. One of them always bullied, would steal other people's toys and so forth. And you could go around to the reasons why they did that. Maybe it's the family environment, but suffice to say, it was a persistent bully. And something strange happened when they put a crying baby in the room, just with that one bully. And it's very interesting because at first the bully was like trying to kick the baby, it was just quite worrying. But after a while, because of all the persistent crying, the bully had to change, had to try to pacify. So anyway, I raised that example because it really depends, like everything else that we talk about, whether it's poverty, water, or it's even empathy, is to start from the root cause to say, how do you fix that problem? And if you believe, and as I do, that empathy is something like a seed that's it's inside, okay? It's not something that's very easy to fix later on. It's much better fixed from young. I almost feel very much, I spend a lot of time teaching, investing my time with the youth because I believe that we need to change the seed. Whoever taught us that we could make investments at pure financial profit without having recourse to social and environmental harm was an idiot. I'm sorry. Because we have limited resources in this world. It's a no-brainer. Okay, no offense to Keynesian. But if Keynesian had known that we had gone to this extreme of the world, we are now trying to pull back from what is otherwise morally right and it's ecological correct thing to do. It's a no-brainer. And that comes really to the second question about businesses. Now, like any decision in life, there's only a pull factor and there's a push factor. We all know that in every single decision. Now, for a for-profit business where they've been told as leaders for centuries, centuries, that your sole purpose is to profit maximize, why would they want to waste their time to invest in social and environmental causes, right? But imagine for a moment that that's changed. And I'll give you an example. I recently met a CEO of a listed company, an agricultural company, one of the largest in Asia. And they're now starting to invest in impact investing, specifically for climate change mitigation. Now, why would they do that? They're doing that as a pull factor because they've realized that in the last 2 years, there have been so many weather calamities that have hit their top line. So even their revenues are going down year on year because they're not investing in the communities of farmers and they're not investing in things that prevent or hedge against weather risk. So it's good business sense, and that's a pull factor. Now, if that's not good enough, let's talk about the push factor. As you can see with the recent sort of haze situation, there are many companies that lose millions of dollars reputationally because if they choose to do something that is wrong, it goes viral overnight. And reputational risk has a hit on your future performance and your financial performance. So many companies are now thinking to start investing in that as almost as a hedge. And I'm not going to stand and play God to judge which is right or wrong, but it's still a step in the right direction. That's my thesis.
So, Kim Wah, you've got a question on government?
Right, okay. I think the thing that we need to think of is capital. Capital in different forms. One is political capital. The second is monetary sense. So when there is a cause, where there's a need, and it's approached by some NGO, a charity, does the government have the ability to do it on its own? Or should they be more engaging to try to drive it with, in collaboration with the charity? If there are many charities in the world, and each of them might come with a very unique proposition, and that proposition might or might not fit with the overall
strategy of the society, of the government. And also, perhaps you might also have to link in to the ranking and sequence of applying that type of course. Say, for example, if you go and say that we need to get people to cycle a lot more because it's healthy, it's free, it's carbon free, etc., but you do not have the right means, safe bicycle track for people to do so. You don't have shelter facilities, all these things in the workplace. How do you get people to get involved? So, from a government perspective, then the government would have to think about the sequence in terms of implementing all these, as well as whether this is the right type of charity to be engaging with. Is it backed by the same type of people, reputable, good track record, etc. So that's in some sense the monetary aspect of perhaps a bit of the logical aspect of the issue. Then we get to the political capital issue. All newly elected politicians have a honeymoon period, and that's where they usually want to ramp up all the more controversial issues. But beyond that, the next election cycle starts coming and people start worrying. Is this the right time to be spending on political capital? Would that affect the election the next round? And how does it affect the lobby, the vested interests who sometimes are very strong? And in the society, you have two different extremes, and the two different extremes usually get publicity. It's the middle ground, which are more quiet, and because it's the middle ground of mainstream, it doesn't get publicized. So the government will then have to think about, is that the right type of fight I want to do to move a certain cause? Is it worthwhile at that point in the political cycle to do so?
Great spokesman for the government. Dilemmas. Thank you for that question, Suez. Let's take one last round of questions because we're nearing the end time. Yes, please.
Test one. Hi, my name is Sam. I'm a humble teacher from MOE, so there's no fortune here. But we do have access to thousands and thousands of young people. And my question is this. We've talked a lot about empathy and we've talked about engaging young people, but how can we, or rather you, with your vast experience and networks and resources and money, how can we better look to strengthen partnerships with our schools so that this problem of empathy can be tackled at a much younger stage? I know it's 0 to 7, but what about 11 to 15 to 17? When you guys organize things and bring your managers on trips, is there a place where companies would look at bringing young people along as really a form of investment for the future and give them that kind of exposure that oftentimes we at MOE don't have the resources to create? I'm speaking on a personal
Thanks, Sam.
Personal platform.
Other questions? We'll give them a bit of time to think, ponder on that. Yes. Nolene has a question. And then over there, perhaps we'll let the lady start first.
Hi, my name is Yuan Ting. I'm working with youth right now, but I'm interested in helping people to connect back with the best versions of themselves, whether it's on an individual or organizational level. Thank you for your insight today. It's very grounding and eye-opening at the same time. So I have a question for all of you gentlemen. If there's one thing that you could shift, whether it's at a personal or organizational or societal level to make a difference in what's happening today, if just there's one thing you could shift, what would that be?
Good question.
Thank you.
Let's hear from Nolene.
I've always believed in following the money and to see where the money goes, because that's what would make a difference. I'm very concerned about some of the things that I've heard. And this is how do we make sure that the money goes to investing in public good and not in public bads. And this whole thing about the pornography was actually very shocking to me, because even after somebody buys it up, and of course the guy becomes rich, but the person who buys it up could actually promote it, and then it becomes a reality, and it changes the nature of our society. So how do we actually make sure that there's an ethics that is part of this whole way of behaving. So
I think Tong Yi didn't quite finish the story.
Yeah.
You know, it's like
so
it was left hanging.
it's an opportunity.
So we'll give him some time to think through.
Yes, and no, and one more. Of course, money comes with power as well. So of course, the
politics around money is absolutely critical, and this is where the Penang side comes in. So how do you, because you are basically a state government in a larger context, how do you manage that?
Great, 3 great questions for us to hear them out. And
I think I better go first. I'll give them the hard ones, right? Okay, so why don't I start with your question first? And it kind of links, which I actually incompletely finished my question on empathy. I think empathy is a seed that's a feeling that's within you. It's like a moral compass. It's hard to know whether you have one or not until you have a scenario where it has to point. So that's exactly what empathy is. It's not an abstract theory, it's in practice, right? You know that you have an empathy when you see someone fall ill and you're willing to help that person, right? So I strongly recommend for many of you young people here that want to basically get more involved in the space is literally to go on the ground. So I can't speak of others, but most impact investors like ourselves have a fellowship program. And it's a 1-year fellowship program. So you generally take a year out. Yeah, it's quite competitive. I think we get about 1,000 applications every year for about 30 to 40 places. And we place each and every fellow into our portfolio organization. So it could be farms, it could be healthcare, it could be education. It's more aligned with your passion and your skill. And you spend 1 year strategically to help them as a social enterprise. You know, it could be helping them with their finances, you're helping them with their strategy, but literally being on the ground and having that connect with beneficiaries. Until you see that situation on the ground, that's how you will know whether or not your moral compass starts to point, and that's where the voice of empathy will come out. And I strongly encourage it. It doesn't have to be a structured program like fellowship, but spend time working with charities, go on the ground, visit people, you know. That's a good way to start. The second one, Noreen, to your question, which I think is a very interesting one, I can't talk about, I could go on all day about this, but I could just talk about the private markets and what we do as an investor. Because if you look at it, the definition of impact investor is the intention to do good, measured by the accountability that you're actually producing that good, right? So at any stage you can stop me. You can either stop me by saying that I do good, but I don't have the correct intentions. And even if I did have the correct intention, you can stop me by saying, hang on, you invested in a rural school, but you actually did improve the education, right? So we're trying to close that feedback loop. And that's the way that we think to create that accountability. It's what the industry knows as mission lock. We're trying to prevent against the drift of mission drift, okay? And we do that through a variety of ways. Naturally, as a proactive investor, we do a lot of due diligence. So we make sure that the CEO of the company, the value system aligns with us as the investors. The kind of idea of the right fuel for the right car, right? You can tell me that your electric car, but after doing your machinery, your check, I find that you're actually running on diesel, right? So it's about doing the due diligence and trying to find that there's alignment with the driver. Because you can have the best electric car, but if the driver is driving in the wrong direction, again, that's wrong, right? So we're trying to get what we call the alignment. And we do that even in the company. We look at the incorporation documents. We see that the mission's actually in the incorporation documents. It's even hot-wired in the talent and expertise of your team. And then we measure them and hold them accountable for it. The next level, we also do it in the form of the investment. So when we give an investment to a company, we somehow have terms that say that you have to deliver that mission. We have it subject to the reporting. So if your school doesn't actually benefit X percentage of poor people and you don't actually improve the education system, it gives us the right to withdraw that investment. That holds them accountable as well. So they're just all these sort of checks and balances that we put in to make sure that they can deliver, and at the same time make sure that we are accountable as investors for that.
It's your work to fight evil as well.
Well, the case that came to me with this young man who was actually developing this technology, it troubled me quite deeply actually when it first hit me. And what happened was that I actually had a pretty extended conversation with the Attorney General's chambers, right? And the question was, if this did come to Singapore, would it be legal, right? The judge in which I was speaking to actually gave a fascinating response, right? And the first response that he gave was something we always talked about, actually even in the social enterprise field. If it doesn't happen in analog, it doesn't happen in digital. What this necessarily means that if it doesn't really happen in real life, nothing on the digital world really takes off anyway, right? The reason why that particular idea is even something which is scary is because it already happens in the minds of people, right? And what this technology is doing is simply bring out into the fore what already happens, you know, on Earth. So when this regularly happens, right, what happens is that Attorney General Chambers said that actually there's nothing technically illegal about it. Because what you're doing is that you're putting your photos in a public sphere, right? Which means that as you click on a bus and someone boards a bus together with you and looks at you, finds you attractive, brings that image into his head, right, and does that, whatever he's doing with it, that's not illegal. Yeah. And that's something itself, right, which basically what this new technology is technically bring out into a digital form, right? So when he first said that, that was deeply troubling for me, right? But I understood where he was coming from. The second response, right, then came from an understanding of, so really at the heart of it, yeah, even men in this room, right, or even women in this room look at that and go, that's a repulsive idea, right? I would never ever begin to use that. So what is it, right, that this person has, right, that doesn't even perceive that this is a possible, you know, tool, right, to use? And the core of it actually is they have empathy. I would never want this to happen to my sister, my wife, my daughter, myself, right? The troubling thing is that when my student came in and demonstrated this technology for me, he used my Facebook. Took my face and put it on this. The most troubling thing I've ever seen, right? And doing so. But by doing so, I think what was interesting about it was that empathy is really what has us begin to see the suffering of others. And it's a person with no empathy that looks at this, I mean, like, and just goes, well, it's just an image, right? And I'll then make it use. The greatest defense we have against technology is not stopping technology. The greatest defense we have in technology is basically educating the consumer that is feeding it, which is why it's actually very important. That goes back to actually what Sam was asking about. What are we doing in the education of children? How do we build empathy, and how do we build resilient communities that has these technologies naturally die in the market, right? Yeah.
Thanks. Kimwa, you want to?
Yeah, so on that, given that it's the education part of it, and that's where usually the government sector steps in terms of setting up the government, the education system, all these. So
how is that, is public good something that in theory is the government's role to be making ensuring it's good, and of course how do you actually champion and actually safeguard the society's values, because with a certain degree of society's value, that's where your vote and your power and your mandate come in, and that's where the energy of the politician will be able to move to whether to encourage or discourage certain public good or public bad. So touching on the issue of how to follow the money, and then the money leads to power and all these, of course, this we have seen it numerous cases of how corruption and all these abuses can happen. What is important is, in today's society, the information is a lot more dispersed. There will be more society pressure, that's one. Secondly, it's easier, it's more transparent for things to be out in the open. Thirdly, then how does the government respond to all these? One specific religion might have a good deed, but not necessarily another one. While the person would have a good intention, what should be done is to raise the standard, the expectation of the society of what a good behavior or good standard ethics should come from certain religions, certain government.
So you hope that the political pressure would set things right?
Implies a certain degree of transparency and accountability in the system.
Okay. We're going to end, and you can make one last statement. I suspect we haven't quite answered the second question. Do you remember?
That's a nice thing for them to end, that one thing. Shall we begin? Do you remember the question? They did very well for sleep-deprived gentlemen.
Go ahead, Tommy.
I honestly don't have answers for the question because I take it very genuinely that things are interconnected these days. I don't have a priority list. If it's one thing itself that me and my other directors will talk about is that we're cause agnostic. We don't support one particular cause over another. And actually, once you start becoming too siloed into one particular cause, we actually blindside ourselves from others. So actually, I don't have a response for what's the one thing I would.
Yeah, it's a really hard question to answer. I was thinking about it as well. But I would say it's sort of along Tongyi's lines, I would say it's collaboration actually. Because we can't do this alone. You know, as a private investor, I can do that for now. But what happens when these companies scale? I need governments. You know, I need to combine a few social enterprises, not just one. And I need people like you guys to continue the baton of leadership, right? To take over, because it's only as good as it can be passed down to future generations. So I would say continuity and collaboration. And I think that's really, really important because I do agree that the space is highly fragmented and people look in their silos. They don't look past their silos. So that's one thing I would like to change.
Thank you, Anne.
I'll keep it brief, and I guess it's the empowerment of the individual is much more important.
To let the person have certain values that was championed, and that's really comes up from it.
Yeah, so that with that kind of empathy, you can deal with the complexities and the evolving nature of a lot of issues.
And ethics would have to be central. Thank you, gentlemen. You did a great job.
One day, wonderful. It leaves me now to give them just a little token of appreciation, an SMU story of 15 years of trying to make a difference in our community.
Thank you all. And now for the last word, may I invite Martin Tan, Executive Director of ISL, to give the closing remarks.
Hello. Hello. How time flew. Did you enjoy yourself? I think it's always difficult to close in what I thought was 1.5 days of very interesting conversations. I had a chance to moderate 2 panels yesterday, and very interesting and difficult question was asked, and I look at some of the speakers and our board members and those who are here. I just want to say we are very deeply appreciative and grateful for all the speakers who have come from their various different schedules. I remember Ern telling me when I've known Ern for a couple of years now, and I was telling him, hey, would you come and speak? He said, I don't speak at conferences anymore. I turned down all conference invites. And I said, you know what? Let's just do one more. And I'm glad he came together with me, who has regretted being here because he stayed up at 2 a.m. Would you please do me a favor, if you can, just give a very warm round of applause to all the speakers who has come and made what really a wonderful time together. So thank you very much. I actually got a couple of slides that I prepared, but I'm not going to use them because a lot of the conversation will start taking roots. All I can say to close is that the role we play as the Institute for Societal Leadership is a new one. It's only been 2 years since we first started, and really we're learning along the way. We're taking very small steps. We're trying new things. And there'll be some things, and there'll be some things that we do, they may not make sense, and we will learn from it. There'll be some that will mean something to you. We talk about conversation not being something that we can do on our own, because then I'm just talking and nobody's talking back. That's not quite a conversation. That's called my wife lecturing me. I think conversation requires 2 or more parties. Conversation requires us to say, you know what, we have a common goal. We have a common mission. We have a common issue that we want to have conversations around, so that because we come from various perspectives, various sectors, we perhaps can find a better answer. Because I don't think
any single one of us, including the speakers who are here, will say that we have all the answers. But collectively, I think we can. Collectively, I think we can do something wonderful. And all we will try to do, and we will work very
hard and we'll do our very best, is to help others do good better. You know your sector very well. You are experts in your field. We don't know half of what you know in your relevant fields. But if through our research, and if you can let us know areas that we can help with, through our programs, if you can let us know what needs that might be on the ground in the various countries you come from, and if you can let us know what kind of conversations that you think will be helpful, as an academic institution, we will be in a unique position to convene some of this conversation, to push the boundaries of some of these questions, even conversation about governments, conversation about non-profits and innovations and so on.
So the best way for us
to say, and bring this whole time to a close, is to say that this, for us, we hope, is the start of a journey together with you. And as we close this summit, I hope that we can have this journey collaboratively, to have this conversation with you, to see how we can do for society just a little bit better. You think we can do that? So can I ask that you don't be a stranger? Please look us up whenever you're in town. We'll be here on the 9th level of Singapore Management University. On our level, we got partners like Lian Center for Social Innovation that we will work very closely with in various parts of SMU as well with the faculty members. But if you have any ideas, any thoughts, or anything that you think that we as an institute can play a part and help you with, please do not be shy to let us know. And I hope that the conversations, and we are breaking for lunch, and we have arranged for the final lunch so that we can have final conversations with the speakers, with some of our board members. We're going to have a board meeting this afternoon. And perhaps we can carry this whole conversation until 2016 when we meet again for the second Societal Leaders Summit here in Singapore. So on behalf of everyone who has worked very hard, if you can do me a favor to appreciate and thank the team that has worked very hard behind the scenes from the Institute of
and as well as the technical crew who have really done a marvelous job to put this whole together. So ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of all of us, thank you so much for being here, and I wish you a really, really nice holiday. And yesterday is Thanksgiving, today is Good Friday. And happy Christmas coming in. Thank you very much. And not Good Friday, Black Friday. Thank you everyone.